so my name is Sigurd Bergmann. I'm an emeritus professor in religious study from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, also Uppsala University, Lund University, Munich University, and chairing the European Forum for the Study of Religion and the Environment. I'm placed in Lund at present. And Nele is with us from Antwerp, who will present herself.
Yes, so I'm a clinical epidemiologist. I'm professor at the Global Health Institute in Antwerp University and associate professor at Karolinska Institute, where I've been working and living for the past 8 years. But since recently, I'm living back in Belgium. So I'm happy to be here today again with you, both of you, who are real eminences in this topic. So I look forward to our discussion.
And the theme for this so far will be not just to stay within the Swedish situation, as we have done most of the time, but to raise our views and horizon to what Christoph has called a world post-COVID. So we will probably switch quite a lot between our observations and reflections on the Swedish. I think Nele and I cannot just let it be there. But with Christoph, our guest today, we might be able to embed also the Swedish situation in a larger and maybe start to open up for visions of a world post-COVID, which we so necessarily need. So we are very grateful to have Christoph Stückelberger as a guest in our sofa today. Christoph is an emeritus professor of ethics at the University of Basel in Switzerland. He has also worked as a visiting professor in Nigeria, in China, Russia, the UK, and he has founded and is chairing the extremely exciting organization, which I also have followed through the years, which is called Globe Ethics, and you find it on the screen, and I really would recommend you all to take a look and move around in the organization, in the foundation's website. So very much welcome, Christoph. And the main reason to invite Christoph today is that he has, or you have, sorry to use the third person, you have, as I guess, in an extremely short time, written a whole book on 620 pages, which is called Global Balance, the vision of ethics science. What might a post-COVID world look like? What can we learn from the ongoing pandemics? Might be the main issue which we look at and discuss together. So could you tell us why did you write this book? What is your driving force?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sigurd. We share a lot of common concerns: environment, development, religion, the role of religion in shaping the world for the future and all that. Now, before I come to your precise question on the reason for this book, just in addition to my background, I work on ethics since my years of studies in theology, and I do it in a way of applied ethics, means to see what can value orientation help us in life, but not only in individual life, but also in society. So the personal ethics, the individual ethics, as we call, what should I eat, should I work, and so on and so on. The interpersonal ethics, our relations, but also a special emphasis on what we call social ethics or institutional ethics. How can we organize or we have to organize a company, a foundation, a government, a state, the living together through institutions. That's my special interest. And now globeethics.net as a global network on ethics worked a lot on business ethics, but now is a full focus on ethics in higher education, because we see that the leaders, and we speak a lot about responsible leadership, future leaders, a good part of them go through the university systems, and how can we help that these future leaders are value-driven and not only money-driven. Money is an important driver, power is an important driver, but this should be embedded into values. Now, coming to your question, why this book? In fact, I started 3 years ago already, and it was with the election of President Trump, but also this new trends of polarization after a period of 15 years from 1990 to 2010 even, let's say 20 years of globalization, where everybody said, yeah, we are one humanity, we should work together. And then this new protectionism coming, we see the limits of being one humanity. We start to defend our own interests by continents, the Europeans, Americans, the Asians, all on national level. So the question is, which was one of my motivations, is to say, how can we balance this vision of a global world, interconnected world with globalization, but do it in a value-driven way. That means also to respect cultural, religious, ethical, economic diversity.
And when the pandemic went on, when the pandemic evolved, what would you say the pandemic could mean for your general long-term interests in value-driven globalization, so to say? Did that accelerate it, or?
Exactly. It accelerated because I started the book, as I said, a few years ago, but then during lockdown, now March or February to June, I was also locked down. And what I observed myself is somehow a higher level of to be alert and maybe to see things in the crisis situation sharper than before. So that was, in my view, one benefit of the concentration through the lockdown, and sitting 3 months at home, the first time in my life, sitting 3 months at home. And this helps to, and I compared it with other transition periods. For example, I always wondered why a reformer like Luther or like Zwingli in Zurich in a few years could publish thousands of pages, because they have been in a crisis situation which gives a new level of consciousness. And that's probably one positive side. But also, of course, with all the dangers of the situation.
When did you realize this was turning into a global crisis? Because I realized, I guess in February, I was already in high alert. And then actually in mid-March, I was already thinking like, oh God, this is going to this is becoming a disaster. As an epidemiologist and an MD, I already saw that, of course, we couldn't predict how it would be. But then, and I personally always was a bit shocked, like everything that I predicted in those early weeks was happening. When did you realize that, as a not MD, not an epidemiologist, but you know the global world better than I do?
No, it was the same period. It was the same period. And because, of course, we read as non-natural scientists, we read all this information. We see the increase of all these statistics. But then for me, a key interest was, of course, the political analysis, because ethics in the sense of international relations, I also teach ethics of international relations in Africa and in Russia and China. So the question of what does it now mean from a science perspective, but also from a political perspective. And I was already quite alert. The only thing I would say, the difference to now is that I still thought in that maybe by the end of this year, the most dangerous period could be over, and we could in 21 go back to a new normal, not the old normal. But now we see that such a challenge is not solved in a year. So that's maybe one main difference I see to my analysis in March.
And you say in the beginning of the book, somehow you talk about the new world disorder in contrast to what you are arguing for, that there's the new age of values and even virtues, we might say, collective virtues, not individual ones necessarily. But would you say the pandemic accelerates also this new world of disorder at present? Because it has gone on and gone on and gone on, and it changes, as we might talk later about, also the balance or the imbalance between the superpowers, which is already clear due to the economic dimension. But this world of disorder, how could it be balanced by values, ethics, spirituality, but also science somehow? What would you say as a hypothesis?
Yeah, I think these are two forces which are somehow struggling with each other, the disorder and the new order. I would say both are happening in the sense of course, this disorder increases the understandable egoism. We first have to look for our own company, our own nation, and so on. But at the same time, we see a re-strengthening of global solidarity. I mean, this vaccine speed now is an example for me that people become alert, and some realize that there is no choice if we don't find the solution together. So I think both is happening, and it's like a struggle, like the wind is the turmoil is there. So. And my contribution, or our contribution from the ethics side should be, and the religious side also should be, to strengthen these positive values and also to criticize openly the negative, where people benefit from the disaster. There have been always winners and losers in wartime, in pandemic time. And of course, our task as ethicists or as value-driven persons is to help that the positive effect win over the negative. And that's not yet given. We are still in the midst of this struggle. But what I think is a change also compared to March is that today, in March, the private sector still gave the signal, yeah, that's a crisis, it's serious, but we know 2008 financial crisis, after 1 year it's over and we go back to the normal. And now I think most of the people know, even in the private sector, in governments, that the new normal is not the old normal. It will be different, and in some sectors substantially different. People may not travel as much as before. Tourism may not be the same as before. Food production may not be the same, and so on. So I think this awareness is raising, but the struggle for values and not only virtues, but also the vices is still there. I see, for example, among the winners, I'm really now analyzing, but it's amazing to see how the billionaires are growing in number, and so the wealth redistribution is so heavy today as we could not imagine. So there are huge winners of uncertainty. The stock market benefits from uncertainty because if you are a good analyst, and I'm in touch with some of them, you are a good analyst, and then you can benefit from this uncertainty, which, I mean, is legal, is nothing wrong with it, but it shows that these are the challenges that we have. I take an example. In Geneva, we have a boom of new foundations. So people benefit, they make more money than before, but also they are aware that their responsibility for society is now should increase.
What would you say about nationalism? So you have spent a lot of time, and we all have, in the critical groups on globalization. Well, because this pandemic somehow seems to change the balance between the former globalization, with all its pro and contras, and some have immediately argued that we will get new nationalism. That has been very true in Sweden, where the government and the Agency for Popular Health has run an horrible exceptionalist, nationalist style, and still believes that we are much better than the rest of the world. But there are also other messages, more in general, from the WHO president, from Ursula von der Leyen, from the European Commission, that we can only stick and find solutions for to come through this if we come together, and we even deepen the let's say life enhancing solidarities and cooperations. But there seems to be another way of nationalist and let's say not globalized but globalistic, or what Ulrich Beck once called the global citizenship, right? So we belong rather to a global community of citizens than to our own small.
But isn't Sweden always been a bit isolated in that aspect as well? Because after those 8 years in Sweden, you heard it often that they were also talking like the continent or Europe, and like seeing them as not being part of it. And for me, that nationalism in Sweden has surprised me a lot, because I come from a country where the nationalistic feelings are probably the least in the world or something. In Belgium, we are not. You will never hear a Belgian really being proud of Belgium. And in Sweden, especially now during this pandemic, even everything was going wrong. All the numbers look horrible in all the line, and they're still defending Sweden so stubbornly. And it seemed that they really believe that, and that's for me something that surprised me.
So that is why Sweden has become so much more exciting for all the international media and also the scientists around, while the Swedes themselves don't bother very much. A majority still wants to blend off and rely to the state, and the trust into the national state is a very, very positive skill in a population where you have had in Sweden for many 100 years of peace, a trust and confidence between the citizens and the government and also the agencies, which is now shaken for many of us, but still. And this is, we shouldn't only talk about the Swedes, but I saw how in the beginning all countries tried to figure out their own way. They were very close in closing borders, finding out this and that, making treaties on things necessary for the healthcare, and so on. And Trump was the most brutal of them all, to even buy the company which now had made the first vaccine in Germany and the US and so on. But after a while, I think it's much more. Can we see a much more closer growing cooperation between countries? Will we get some more European policy which is backed up from all member states, or will we still have a more increase in competition of nations in this? I'm not really ready.
I think it's the Swedish case is interesting to analyze and to understand some of the topics that we are discussing of developments. And maybe I start with a short perception that I have. You know, as a Swiss, when we travel, especially in Africa, we say I'm a Swiss, then the people always say, you are Swedish. Then I said, yeah, I'm happy that you confuse the two, because we are close friends and we have same values and so on.
Your chocolate is way better.
That changed. Now when they say, you're Swedish, then I said, no, I'm Switzerland. We are different. So you see the change in attitude. And I think it helped me, and maybe you can share the screen of page 168. I made an analysis of value clusters in the world. Is that possible that it is shared from your side?
Yes.
You see on the horizontal line, survival versus self-expression values. So on the left side, you struggle for survival. And then once you have reached some basic needs covering, then you go to self-expression values on the right side. And on the vertical, you have traditional versus secular rational values. Now, the African continent, of course, generalizing, is to a great extent on the survival and traditional value systems. And now the opposite, you see the Protestant Europe, a more liberal worldview, where self-expression, individual freedom, individual values are very much valued, and also the rational secular values, even though Protestant Europe means also religious, but not in the same way as the Orthodox or Catholic or Confucian one. Now, within that, even you see Sweden on the right, on the top right side. That means the exceptionalism somehow is seen on this graph. Sweden, in value terms, seems to be an exception in terms of radical self-expression values. So individual freedom is very highly valued, and also the rationalism. Now, rationalism we can discuss, because my analysis, of course, as yours, I guess, is that the decision may not be as rational, or at least not so scientific as one would expect. But that shows that now Switzerland, for example, is still in the Protestant Europe, but closer to Catholic Europe, because we are more or less half Catholics and Protestants, and more to the center of this whole universe of value-driven analysis of countries. And that helps me to understand that when we deal with differences in dealing with COVID, that is related to our different value systems. So, for example, the Chinese Confucian, you see the brown Confucian on top, and then on the left side, so still many parts of China traditional, rural, but then rational. It's not a country which would define themselves as religious, even though religion plays a big role. But so when we have now between Swedish and Chinese strategies, a comparison, we see this is based on really fundamental differences. What we said about discipline in the Asian countries, and you, Sigurd, mentioned it already, that is one expression. In Europe, we struggle with this kind of we call it then authoritarian, centralized policy against COVID. But for Asians, and I talked a lot with our friends in China, in Japan, in Singapore, even in Korea, they all say, no, for us, that's normal. The government has the responsibility and we implement it. So for Europeans, this is a bit strange, but it's for them, it's not strange, and we should respect. And I would even say, and I wrote an article about it, that in dealing with COVID, I think the cases show that the Asian model is a very serious, somehow good model in dealing with the pandemic.
Yes, and I would say just complete about Sweden. From political science in the country, you can learn that one of the main characteristics in Sweden is so-called state individualism. That means that the national state guarantees the highest possible level of the individual rights in the country. What we now see, and this works fine in peace, in harmony, in also economic growth context, but it does not work with regard to migration, intercultural conflicts, also security conflicts nearby in other regions, Russia and so on. And it definitively does not work in the pandemic management, as if you hand over all the responsibility for the decisions about what is the best for the science and the epidemiology, that is on your screen to the survival and health and life of the citizens. If you hand over this to the individual citizens, what will come out of that? And if the recommendations are not even science-driven, then ethics moves into a vacuum, where moralities not even are discussed, where it's just your individual well-being, which is fueled by the national state, so that the government can be left in peace, and that the bureaucrats and autocrats can be left in peace. So it's who is the responsible agent in such a system.
And that's how I would define it. It seems to be like a lack of leadership as well, because nobody really takes charge. And those who are supposed to be the authorities, they also don't take the responsibility, because they also say like, oh, it's not my responsibility. They literally say that. So for me, it seems that nobody is really kind of, trying to get the whole country behind them and like, okay, we'll do something, we'll fix this, we do this together. And that lack of leadership, it's something I compared with Belgium, I also noticed a bit the previous years, but I never really thought about it. But then, it's interesting to indeed see the parallels. And of course, I don't know the history of Sweden as well as people who lived their whole lives there. But then the last year I learned a lot.
This map
and I think
does quite a lot, but it is also not an explanation as in itself, as we see also Norway and Denmark on the secularist and rationalist side, and high valuation of self-expression. And the United States are more in the midst, and the Trump pandemic politics reminds one more and more to the Swedish also, and so on. So this is only true for some of the values, but it is.
But then you also
that we have cultural differences and cultural and ethical differences in the world populations, which really impact on how we deal with a crisis, which is a common global crisis. And that makes it interesting to ask question, what can we learn from each other, right?
Exactly. I think that's the basic question I have with Globalance. How can we analyze first these value systems, but then see what we can learn from each other, but also how we can avoid the extremisms and balance these values. And I think one key in what we discuss right now is really this value of freedom, of individual freedom, versus obedience, discipline, also fair distribution, so when we are not able to balance, and the US or Trump is attacking the Chinese and say, yeah, you are authoritarian and that cannot be our model, and the Chinese may say, yeah, but your liberalism and anything goes and is not the solution. You see the disaster with the COVID figures. So then it's the ping pong. And my view would be to say, okay, we have, you can show the slide. I can explain on that slide the relation. So Globalance means relational thinking. Globalance means we put we see a network of it's like in biology or in science. We think
epidemiology
not in
as
box.
well.
Sorry?
Also in epidemiology, you also have to see all the different things together, I think, yeah.
Only when you see the relation between, can you show maybe the slide again? What I try here to say is value systems are relational. They all relate to each other. And of course, I come to the center at the end. So these are 10 values, and I work a lot on global ethics. That means we can see that most of the countries and most of the value systems around the world, in one way or the other, have these values in their system. The difference comes now from the weight they give. For example, in a socialist country, of course, equality and justice is higher value than individual freedom. So freedom and justice are related, but have more weight or less weight in a system. Empowerment in terms of individual empowerment maybe not as important in China as in other countries, but empowerment through overcoming hunger is very key. So if you have a population with less hunger, that's an empowerment instrument. So the meaning or the meaning of empowerment is contextually different, and we could go through the whole set of that. And what I do in this book, Globalance, here is in fact to go through these different topics and say what are the main opposite values in a specific topic, in dealing with COVID, in dealing with nationalism, in dealing with economic system, in dealing with families, in dealing with sexuality. You can take whatever. But as long as we are aware that they are interrelated, really like a spider net, when you draw on one side, it has an influence on all the others. It's not isolated. That's why exceptionalism in terms of isolation cannot work.
What would you say, Christoph and Nele, about Southeast Asia? Because this is one of the exciting things to compare Europe and especially Sweden now, where the freedom on the left side of your circle is really on the top of all. This is very different in Southeast Asia. So how would you characterize, with the help of this scheme, Southeast Asia and also Switzerland or maybe Sweden in how what kind of epidemiological application we prefer due to our cultural backgrounds? And
for me, the thing that if I compare the two of these concepts that's jump out for me when I compare Sweden and Belgium, it's solidarity and responsibility. That's two things that I really noticed in Belgium that were really, really strong. Solidarity for the healthcare workers, for each other, initiatives, and also the responsibility, the personal responsibility. We do this together, and those are two things that that seem to be completely lacking in Sweden. I think for me in the Southeast Asia, I think community is also really important, because the community life, it's like everyone together. It's also not just, I think in Europe it's more like families and smaller entities, but then in China it's really the whole community, the whole city, and it seems to be more balanced, that everyone has like the same value. Of course. Security is important for everyone, and participation. But I don't know. What would you say, Christoph, for Southeast Asia? Which one do you think is the most important?
No, I agree with what you say. Maybe I add, if we translate peace into harmony, for example, this whole notion of harmony in China, which is a high value, and of course we could say, oh, that's authoritarian harmony. Dictated from above, but it's much more. When you are there, I see that harmony is really something embedded in the Asian value system, which I think we can learn from it. They are really trying not to be so confrontational as we may be in many of us in the West. Sustainability, I think, is something also with slightly different connotation. What I see in Asian countries, and I know China better than others, is also this long-term thinking. I mean, people saying, yeah, we have a 5-year plan, but in fact, we think of 50 years, period. Whereas the short-term thinking of next election, 4 years,
Europe,
is really a problem we have in the West, I would say, with all respect to democracy. Now, India, I think, is different because India, the individual freedom, the clan freedom is high. Sustainability is also maybe not as high as valued or in a different way. So I think it's difficult to generalize, but just as a few observations. And my learning from really working on all continents is it's such a potential if we learn from each other and we say not, we have to convince the others that they have to have the same system as we, but we say, no, what can we learn from you, but also we challenge you. Because it does not mean that we accept everything. Of course, human rights in terms of individual rights are violated in China more than in other countries. On the other hand, the collective right, the right to food, for example, is more respected in China than in America. There are more hungry people in America than in China. So that means even human rights have to be defined what we mean. It's not only the individual political right. Human rights is a whole set of rights. So that would be a bit my hope, that we can learn from each other, respect each other, and challenge each other at the same time. And what I put in the middle with love, there is it's not just a cloud of stars which are independent from each other, these values. There is somewhere a center. And the center, I call it love. That means if we act from the center of this, then we can find the right balance between them. And I quote Augustinus, the church father in the 5th century, who said, dilige et fac quod vis, means love and then do what you want. That means as long as you act from this center, you will have the sensitivity what is appropriate in a specific situation. If you need more discipline or more freedom or more justice or more community or less community, if you do it from this center, that's why I say the center is keeping the system together.
Okay, so I could use this, if you allow me, this scheme also in another way. While you are offering us a vision where all these different values are interacting and interconnected and part of a whole, I could also use them as opposites and ask for what they can tell us, how they can help us to analyze the conflicts and differences. One thing is to learn from a vision of the whole, which we negotiate with each other. The other is to start in our real conflicts and see how we could figure out these and move on. If I, for example, try to use the scheme to compare my own 3 home countries. It's very painful to live in 3 Heimaten. It is Sweden, Germany, and Norway. We all spent many of decades in all countries in the families, and I'm still pending in between them. And it's really painful to see the different approaches to the pandemic management. So if I use this, I would say in Sweden, it is very strange to understand how freedom can be at the top and how participation and security on the left side of the scheme are not at all at that highly ranked. while community in some specific Swedish folkhem, they call it the civil society, which has made the trade unions, the social democrats, which are government now, and so on, possible. Also a very strong sense of belonging to one common community, which is much, much deeper in Sweden than in Germany. It's also there in Norway, right? And Switzerland. It's different again with all these federal, local, regional identities, which are, like in Norway, superior to the national one. But let go. But how can it be that freedom is the most value while security or survival and health are not as that balanced? So I can also use the scheme for an analysis of imbalances, so to say. If I compare to Germany, for example, participation is maybe even higher than freedom, because the population there for month after month, now also in the 10th month, is between 80 and 90% for the restrictions, the lockdown, the sharp responses, because of the best for everyone. So freedom is there, of course, but it's mostly on the demonstrations, which are more kind of hyper-liberal, esoteric, anti-democratic, and alliances of people who are very monistic about their freedom understanding, while where freedom is not the freedom of my neighbor, or the love to your neighbor, the love to yourself, or in the Christian ethics, of course, indissolubly interwoven. But if you only talk about freedom, what will you get then? So justice is, of course, also important. But there was one, not on this scheme, which I wondered about from your book, where you said discipline in the Asian countries. It's a much more unproblematic and higher ranked value than it is in the liberal democracies, secularized democracies of the West and North. So maybe there are some explanations that a government do not want to impose sharp and painful restriction to its populations if they don't feel they have the support. But this is totally different in Asia, as you say. China, okay, the autocratic collectivism, but let's talk about Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. Of course, they have also been through the SARS-1 epidemics already before and made very, very valuable experiences, which Nele probably can tell us more about. But there is something in the cultural interrelation, so to say, between sharing power and have a trust, where also the golden rule, which you write about, or the imperative that you should not kill your neighbor, where solidarity and security, community, where every individual life has the same human value, and so on, where this is not as that easy to violate in the pandemics, while it is.
I was now actually also thinking, besides the love, you could also mention just happiness in the middle. And if you would rank the things which would make you happy, okay, freedom, of course, being in jail or in prison, it doesn't make you happy, but then isn't like solidarity, community, those things making you more happy? And I also just wanted to come back to what Christoph said about the peace and the harmony. Isn't, in my perception, I also traveled quite a bit, and like in Asian countries, they indeed, and that's something I noticed in the book as well, that you talk about that balance, that they aim for balance, the yin and yang in the Asian countries, but then in Western countries, they indeed often aim for perfection or the best, or the upper thing, while in Asia indeed they aim for some sort of a balance. And indeed you have if you have good and bad things in your life, then you appreciate the good things also better. So it's indeed interesting to see how those basic concepts are interpreted so differently or valued so differently among the world. I think so. Did you expect that Asia was gonna do so well in this pandemic early on, Christoph, or?
Not in general, but I think we have seen in February, March already some successes of this in Asian countries. But of course, it's also difficult to generalize because I mean some have also still high number of cases. But in general, I think it confirms, yes, what we just discussed, that this harmony, community orientation, and acceptance of some discipline is in a crisis situation rather than an advantage. In other situations, it may be a disadvantage. But just to add the experience of Switzerland, where we also struggle between central decisions and federal decisions, federalized, decentralized decisions. And I think the observation was interesting. We are also a country, you know, compromise is a high value. We try to bring on board everybody. So the first wave was very centralized. The central government took over emergency rules and laws and took a lot of competence in the hand of the national government. But then came the criticism of the cantons. Yeah, but that's fine for a few short period, but don't repeat that. So after the first wave in June, when we went back to normal, and then over summer, and now the second wave was totally different. The Swiss, the national government was agreed and was somehow pushed by the cantons, the regions, to give more responsibility to them. So the second wave is now administered by the cantons. And of course,
the second wave is worse now in Switzerland now? Is
as worse as, or almost as worse as the first, yes.
Okay.
In some cantons more. But I mean, still, this question of centralized, decentralized power and decision making is an issue, and it seems it's interesting to say, okay, in wartime, for example, it's clear. Second World War, it was the national government who took the lead, had to take the lead. Foreign policy is national, but now a pandemic. What can be done on and has to be done on national level, and where it has to be done implemented on cantonal, because the differences in the cantons are very substantial. It's not fully explained. Geneva, Vaud is, and so on is more affected than other cantons. So that means a certain decentralization of power and decision making makes sense. So participation, again, freedom, participation, fairness. It's all about balancing these things in specific situations. So we would say, as a conclusion, first wave, centralized, was okay. Second wave, let's now try to be more decentralized. But if the experience shows that the effect, the expected impact is worse than the first, we may go back in the third wave to a centralized solution. So that means, and that's why also the scientists like you, Nele, play an important role to give the figures, to analyze, to understand what are behind, because that is another issue. I think we, in such a crisis situation, nobody knows really. It's so complex, it's so new. All the scientists say this virus is unpredictable. It's behaving a bit like somehow randomly. Of course, a part is predictable, but part not. So we are all somewhere in the dark, partly. And that is, of course, the windows of opportunity for all kind of charlatans and all kind of conspiracy theories, because it's just an expression of not knowing.
But
And again, just to finish one sentence, here again, the balance between knowing and taking decisions without full knowledge is again a question of balance. Sorry.
But Nele, I saw, this is interesting what Christoph says about the Switzerland's response to the first and second wave, and the national and the regionalized responses, because the virus has confused us. Wouldn't it have been much more appropriate in the first phase, where the virus were only appearing at hotspots, clusters, local places, before it moved into a nearly whole covering geographical contagion as we have now? So wouldn't the local and regionalized responses been the most efficient in the first phase, while the national ones are needed by now, because we have
that's what I well, that's indeed a bit what I see. So if I see Belgium, the first wave, they made a mess out of it. But if you think, there wasn't even a government when the pandemic started. Now they have a government, and the second wave was handled way faster. So, and you actually see, they're way more organized. And now Belgium is doing really good in, getting the same regulations all over the country, because there was confusion, at 5 kilometers further, the rules were different, and now it's the same all over the place. So in Belgium, they're doing something nationally, and it's working. And it's really nice to see, they implement regulations. 2 weeks after, you see the effect on the numbers. And now in Sweden, in the first wave, okay, there was only a bit of national thing, and the regions were all saying, like, it's not our responsibility, or we just follow. And then now they are kind of standing up a bit, but then it's a mess, because every region is doing something different. And from the century, it's still not a uniform, clear message, because they basically go against all the evidence still. So I do think, especially now, it should be more uniform. Now should be the time also that European countries also come together, like, how do we do it? Because that's now a discussion here in Belgium, because the shops are opening in the neighboring countries. So there is also pressure that they will open. Yeah, they will open again in a few days in Belgium again, because there are no borders. So if the shops remains closed here, they just go over the border. So now is the time. The hospitals, the numbers are starting to look better. Now is the time that they should have discussions European-wise. The worst thing should have been over now in most countries. So now they should all work together, I think, to see, like, how can we cope it, because you can't do this on as your own country. Not in Europe. In New Zealand is something different. They can control the whole country. There are oceans all around. Australia, the same. But in Europe, they just need, I think, a more centralized or a more organized and uniform way of handling this, because they can never do it on their own, because people just cross the borders, and then same for the vaccinations and everything.
If we are continuing to write your book, Christoph, which we are doing by talking about
I like the discussions.
There is also the need for a balance in a context of imbalance between local and national and global, or let's say local, regional, European, global, which we have discussed for so many years in the globalization discourse. And how forces of localizations can prevent hope, and the globalized in the local, and the other way around, how to get the locally conscious globalization and so on. But now it's really a challenge, right? And the sad, very, very sad and tragical situation in Sweden, which we face, is that the government and the regions and the communities, we have 3 levels of responsibilities, also legal, they are all blaming each other.
That's from the beginning, yeah?
Responsibility at all. So there is just a vacuum of political ethics in how the government blames the regions for not having done something they have not recommended them to do, and the communities who are responsible for the elderly, the nursery, the elderly care homes,
Well, I think that's also completely opposite as in Belgium, because in Belgium, before the rules were in place, some people at the local level already took measures. I know some villages where they have many elderly people, they said, okay, now no visitors allowed, everyone stays in, libraries are closed. And that was only, one of the coastal villages where, many people go when they retire. So when there were no national rules, they took action. While in Sweden, it was the opposite. There are no national rules, and then they say we don't do anything. And many of the, so many things went wrong there as well.
Yeah.
In Sweden, we're so hopeful, as Christoph earlier talked about. So in this, what I called vacuum of political ethics, we also could see local leaders taking much responsibility in the vacuum. Our son
in Sweden?
Disabled sphere, also on the communal level. Some care home leaders in the LSS, also the disabled spheres, and so on. But they were very, very alone.
But there were also repercussions against people who took the lead in Sweden. If schools did more action, like, following international guidelines, they were reported to Skolverket and everything. They were reported because they did more than Folkhälsan said. They were, asking for isolation of the family, or they were allowing mouth masks and everything. And then there were repercussions. It was completely crazy.
If you use a face mask, you can risk to be attacked rhetorically by others who say, who do you think you are, and don't you believe in our leader and our state, and so on. We don't need this mask. So it has been politicized in a very deconstructive and life-threatening way. So maybe the mask would help us to switch over to another thing, which I also...
Can I first just add one sentence on what you just said? I think this COVID shows also the importance of understanding of balance as a dynamic balance. What do I mean? If you look at this picture, it is a balance which is very tiring in a way, because constantly you need to balance every second, otherwise you fall down. And you have these two people. It's my friend in China who is an artist, who then helped to put these two figures on top. So when one figure moves, the other can fall down. And that's the relatedness, relationality that we as we call it. And the dynamism means some people think the concept of balance is boring because you're just stable and nothing happens. That's not. Balance means a constant move. And I compare it with a dancer who has to balance each time. And that leads me back to the question of also the center, the love. I learned from dancers, they can only dance if they are centered in the belly. Yeah? So the belly of the body needs to be stable, and then you can move around without falling. And that's a bit what we need in our societies. That means when we lose the center, it can explode, it goes in all directions. But as long as we have, and that's where political ethics comes in, as long as we know we have an identity, we Swedish are not lost in a crisis, we have a center of values, and we act out of the center, and then we can have differences, and we have in November to take other measures than in March, and so on. That's then all based on a centered value system. So, and that leads me to the next point, which is key in my value system, that is, and ours, that is the balance between fundamental principles, which are stable over centuries and even millennia of years, and the adaptation. Because, in ethics, we have this polarization. Those who say situation ethics, you decide on the situation, and you have to decide in each situation your value system. And the other opposite, more in the tradition, for example, of the Catholic natural law, you have eternal values, and the context is not as important. So I simplify. So it means we need, of course, these 10 values that I described. They are not values of 2020 or 2021. they are valid throughout centuries and millennia of years. But we have then to adapt it with a contextualization, inculturation, whatever you call it. That's another balance,
Provoke you. I would like to provoke you a little bit, but just for a short
Please.
time. Because then I would like us to talk about also science and ethics, how these can fuel. But before this, on the let's say meta ethical line, as your vision is balance, from chaos theory, which I think also includes much wisdom, not only knowledge and empirical observation, but also, let's say, ancient wisdom somehow. It's already in the Old Testament store where it starts with something very confusing, controversial, whatever. But then ecological systems strive for chaos, but they strive also for equilibrium. And there is some kind of a constant change between chaos, states of chaos and states of equilibrium. But this is not mechanical, and it's not easy to figure out what impacts these two motions from the balance to the imbalance and so on. So I think there is also the need to somehow complete your vision of global balance and global balances to values and virtues with concepts of threat, evil. We have the whole demonology. So what is it in our both in evolution, but all which victimizes life in order to figure out which is the best way, right? And also in the human societies, we are victimizing each other for the sake of what? So there is some kind of a I wouldn't go that much long to Asia to say there is a constant change in between this. But we need sharp analysis, as the life sciences, for example, have in medicine about pathologies. What is the pathological cell? Where do we find the process we have to attack and to take care of in order to figure out what is a life necessary way of fading away and what is the unjust, the painful, the one that could be avoided. So the whole struggle in life sciences, I have learned from this cooperation in the Science Forum, where we have found each other for months now, is how to deal also with social pathologies like the human body is. What is the border? What kind of concepts can help us to differentiate between the necessary pain and the pain that must be avoided, so to say? You see what I'm out after somehow. It's a third dimension in your.
Well, I think what you say is very interesting, and we could further deepen it. The question of what is the relation between this dynamic balance system and the chaos theories, and I think it's compatible because and I'm not a specialist on chaos, but I was always attracted by this. But if we would say, if we have a deep crisis in such a balance, it's a kind of perception is chaos. The stability is gone. We don't know where to go. If we imagine that this person falls down, this balance is gone. This may gone. So it's a total chaos period. And then we have to rebuild step by step these kind of different levels of balances. And maybe that's the perception of chaos. I may be wrong. I mean, Nele is more a specialist in chaos probably, but I don't know if that makes sense. But I try to say that your aspect, I think, is not contrary, but would give a very good additional dimension of understanding what dynamism in balancing means, or could mean. It's not just a soft, a little bit right, a little bit left. Re-establishing balance in a crisis situation can be very fundamental.
That's a bit how I feel it now in Sweden, that it's now utter chaos. The science they don't listen to, the politics, I'm okay. We've heard also in the science forum, many people have now it's going to change, now it's going to be better. Now we're 6 months later, it's still not better. They're still not following science. Or okay, there are things changing, but how do you get out of this? It seems that in Sweden they have been so extremely stubborn in their own way of ignoring science, of being different than the others. And how it has created so much damage. And for me personally, it feels like the whole handling of the pandemic did more harm to the society than the virus itself. Because I know so many people who left Sweden. So many people were suffering while they didn't have to suffer. How can Sweden get out of this? Is it just gonna, be a black page in the history books? And how can we are still in an acute situation, but then I don't know. It seems I don't know how. In the beginning, I was like, okay, we can give advice, we can try to change the policy and make them adapt to the scientific evidence and everything. And now I'm more like, it's no point.
It would be very tempting to not just analyze and react and write our debate articles and run webinars and YouTube movies with regard to the present context. It would be very tempting to draw a real large picture of the future of Sweden.
Yeah.
Everything could have been different if we have done it almost as the other ways at the European countries, or even better, for my sake. But where do we go? That I sometimes do this, but it breaks down all the way because of the strange and crazy things going on all the time. But before we try to do this, maybe we could end with such a vision, because Christoph's book starts with these words, and maybe we could continue to write them also with regard to Sweden at the end. But what I would like to ask you, Christoph, is science and ethics. So we cannot simply say we need both in order to strive for a better balance between these different values. There is a problem in between science and ethics to be figured out before, and we have concepts and so. But if you could somehow, would you say that ethics would come before science? In order to get a real good science, and especially a really good life science, you have already the moral dimension in the notion, the concept of life science. There is something that need to be protected. The doctors must figure out what is a death that is natural and what is a death that we could turn into a good life, or even 1 week, 1 year, 10 years, whatever. So how would you figure out the interrelation between ethics and science? And for me, ethics is never ever a theory in its own. It's also, as you know, I've written about aesthetics. That is the perception of the suffering of my neighbor, the other human being, or my own suffering, that must be seen with the eyes and the senses before it is turned into an ethical problem. So there is something in how we look at each other, how we behave with regard to each other, and how we conceptualize and make ideologies and reflections about what is right and wrong. But what is the role, you would say, to a balanced pandemic management from science and ethics? What are the contributions in your view?
Yeah, very key question. Maybe it has different levels. One is to make the link first to Sweden, as we just discussed. Just as a hypothesis, and maybe later also a question to you, is that this rational liberal worldview, which is rooted in Protestantism to some extent, but of course many other factors, leads to a kind of emptiness in the spiritual level, and that leads then probably to this other extreme of anti-science. Now science is no more, we need to come to another solution, and we believe to the witchcraft, what type of people we have who tell us heaven on earth or hell on earth, and we believe them and no more the science. So this polarization as a result of an exaggerated rationalism, that would be a hypothesis, because when I look at Africa, for example, where science was respected but never on the throne of the king of everything. So they always said, of course, science is fine, but we know that there are other realities on Earth which influence us, and we count on them as well. I mean, I'm not at all defending this attitude, but it shows there is a different view on science. And that means now, I think we are in a situation where the epidemiologists, of course, are the priests of the time. In 2020, the epidemiologists tell the truth. And everybody is looking at their lips and tries to understand. And of course, there are differences between the epidemiologists, but they are the kings, and that then
and queens.
Sorry.
And
the queens. Sorry, of course, the queens, as many as the kings. So thank you. Now, coming to your point, as apart from COVID, but it has an influence on COVID. Yes, I'm deeply convinced that ethics and science are two sides of the same coin. We cannot have science without a value system, because only then we know what does harm or it does not harm. I was for 10 years member of the Swiss National Ethics Committee on biotechnology in the non-human field, so not medical, but the GMOs and all that. And of course, that was the constant struggle. What is the role of giving ethical guidelines for GMO research, GMO practice, and so on? Just as one example, we had others. Now, I think within that, we still have to differentiate between fundamental research and applied. And I learned also from our sons, 2 of the 4 are in science. And for example, the one in Hamburg in the nanotechnology research, he says this is fundamental research, and he's very interested in ethics, but he says this is not the level where the key ethical questions come, except, how much money, billions you invest in a new accelerator or machine and so on. That is economic ethics question. But the ethical challenge comes mainly in applied science. So, and there are manifold. And of course, I would say, and I write it also in the book, that we need on all levels, in a private company, in government, in as an individual researcher, we need this ethical training, ethical awareness, ethical standards, ethical codes, and many exist. But this is very key, because what I felt in this National Commission of the Swiss government was often we are asked when things are already there. And then you say, can you give us the blessing of what we are doing? And that's not the right way. I always said in this commission, you as a Novartis or whatever kind of top-level researchers, come to us at the beginning before you start the research, the applied research, and not at the end. And then you ask, can you give us the ethical justification for it? So I think that is very key. And that's maybe also one lesson of COVID, that we say, yes, science and ethics have to be related from the very beginning.
Yeah, I just to avoid misunderstandings in Sweden, what Nele and I complain about in between the lines, it's not that we have an agency who provides witchcraft and so.
Sure.
No, the problem in Sweden is that we, due to some parts of the constitution and the traditions and how we share power in between the government, the parliament, and the agencies with general directors, and that we have a situation where the government, the prime minister, has decided to give all power to one person and the general director of the National Agency for Public Health, right? And in Germany and all the other European countries, also the Nordic ones, a government which in itself is not trained as scientists, and that is not necessary, of course. Everyone as a citizens should be able to enter a government or a political party or parliament without scientific trainings. But if you have a whole range of leaders who are not trained at all in higher education or science, you need a very good communicative process. So the communication in between science, the agency, and the political decision makers is the point. And in Germany, these many, and also in Switzerland, as far as I have been able to follow this, the scientists have been very, very clear to make a distinction between the foundation from their scientific observations and interpretations must be turned into a political negotiation about what is right and wrong. So ethics is both in science and in politics, but practiced in different ways. The scientists should strive for the best possible and the most self-critical and transparent and so on, to produce reliable knowledge and result, but knowledge turning into wisdom, so to say, Nicholas Maxwell's wonderful theory, knowledge turning into wisdom and into political decision-making must rely on science that also tells the politicians and the public, the people, what they do not know. So it's both what they know, what they do not know, and what they recommend that produces the basis for the political negotiation. What is the right or wrong say? And one must always be able to correct oneself. So especially in a crisis management, you must always be responsive and contextual. What did it mean here? And all this whole dimension we lack totally, because we have a one man, or let's say 3 man power constellation who makes it all and gives a total damn into all scientists in the country. And we have a media which never ever runs a self-critical for the public, but is mostly the megaphone of the power. And we have a government which just a week ago stepped into the scene and started to have opinions about epidemiology and so on. So this
is it a lack of ethics training?
I use your another triangle, which I found very, very helpful to understand Sweden, where you and we could also include the concept of trust, science, and ethics, then it helps me really to understand the depth of the Swedish tragedy, because you have a very, very high, incredibly high level of trust and confidence between the people and the government, but you have a very, very low level of including ethically skilled science delivering the necessary tools. So if we would have had a science participating fully and full engines in the decision making, then we would have done it in another way. And the result is obvious. We have now 6,600 deaths, I think.
Reported.
Okay. And we have also an economy which is the double worse of Germany, for example. Okay, you cannot compare such large and small countries, but the OECD has been very clearly on that Sweden had, both with regard to the health of its population and their own economy, the worst rank, the lowest rank in Europe, right? But it doesn't matter. They just go on and go on and on. So how to cope with this imbalance of trust on the one side and ethics and science on the other? That is my.
How would you, Nele, do that? I mean, how, as a scientist, how do you integrate ethics or?
For me, I think ethics come first, because we are also ethically obliged to do research, which is important. So we should prioritize the research which could have the highest impact on health and on our patients, I think. And I'm now actually also wondering if, because I had my ethics courses, and also in med school, in my epidemiology training, I've come across, but then I was wondering, is there a lack of ethics training and moral discussions in education in Sweden? Because you could wonder, they don't even do the Hippocratic Oath for the physicians. I think it's one of the few countries in the world where doctors don't have to do a Hippocratic Oath. Here in Ghent, my alma mater, where I studied, they actually introduced, when you do your PhD defense, at the end, you also have to do some sort of an oath, like that you promise that you will do ethically right research and that you will do proper research and everything. So here in Belgium, things are discussed also during education. You talk about abortion, euthanasia, so many topics. And for me, I wonder, do they actually, euthanasia is also, I came across it in Sweden, that I raised it, and then it's like suddenly also coming into a wall, and then I was like, did they kind of discuss that? So I was wondering, if they would have had more ethics training, would this have changed? Could this have been different? And okay, in Belgium, we also had training, and people consider, especially in med school, you have to learn your anatomy and your surgery and it's everyone is aiming to get into the specialties and everything. So ethics is maybe also not valued that high. And I must admit myself that I always thought that ethics and morals were so normal, and I thought they were uniform. And okay, it was interesting to learn about the theory, but I thought those values were like for everyone. Until I really started coming across, of course, that there are ethical challenges and that you have to think about. So, I don't know. Is it?
There is an unhealthy mixture also of economy and the life sciences. Because doctors who know so much of the human being and the body have always been tempted to use their knowledge for own profits, right? If I promise you 5 more life, you can give me whatever you have. And now we have the whole neoliberal and the economistic globalization, where money makes it all go around. And we started to talk about the world of disorder, where the invention of money for the only value that counts any longer. This has, of course, also moved into, not only in Sweden at all, into the applied life sciences. And it's different in different countries. Switzerland, I don't know, but in Sweden you have a national system for the healthcare and the common insurance system, which in my view still looks like the best structure, but it also have been privatized and sold out to corporations and so on. And this has made horrible results in the elderly care, for example, where also the national or communal, local institutions have followed the same new public management styles as the private ones and so on. So we have some kind of a brutally monetarized system of taking care of each other. So thinking and trying to act according the double or triple command to love oneself in the same way as loving one's neighbor, loving God, or whatever you believe in, it's not easy in this new world of disorder, to put it in Christoph.
But I think the what I would encourage is that policymakers, politicians, parliaments, scientists, ethicists are in a stronger dialogue to each other, because we cannot have a once for all answer. And I deal also in my book, but also in other books. For example, I have a booklet done with Africans on dealing with ethical dilemma. Very concrete, 50 cases where professionals in their professional life can say, how can I deal with an ethical dilemma? Because we should not blame each other. You are a bad guy if you opt for saving jobs, and you're a bad woman because you are opting for a health priority. These are real ethical dilemma. How to save lives by protecting, by health measures, by lockdown, and how to save lives by maintaining jobs, because somebody who dies from hunger or dies from a virus, both die. Yeah? So there is a real ethical dilemma, and we should try to find out what are the values behind the dilemma and other situations to solve it. And my approach is in ethical dilemmas that we normally should find not an absolute priority, saying in each case around the centuries it's always the same value on top, but that's again this relational thinking. So for example, to say in lockdown 1, health, we did not know the dimensions, health has to be the absolute priority. And then came the economy, and now you are killing the economy. Now we need to care more about business. Now, that is a real dilemma. And my answer would be, we cannot say now health forever in the first place, or economy forever in the first place. We really have to analyze, and that's where also the economists and the scientists and the others come in. We need to see what are the real dangers of saving life. The value is to save lives and to allow a life in dignity for everybody. Yeah? That would be my expression of value. And now is the question, how can we best do it with opening a shop or not opening? But it's always about saving lives and with a sustainable economy. But you understand what I mean. So again, it's this relational thinking, and that needs the constant dialogue. And what ethics can contribute is to sharpen the view of what is the real debate behind the political pragmatism and power games.
This is very important for me, really, and I think it could be the best conclusion also from our talk, to be honest, which can be turned into both a scientific and a political demand, right? That is to really accelerate and strengthen the discourse about a corona ethics. That is, what can we learn from this with all we already know and what this virus reveals in our political pathologies all over? how can we really move closer to each other in striving for negotiating what a good life for all in equity, sustainability, gender balance, balance between humans and animals, and so on and so on. What this means, and there I can see quite a lot of constructive and creative forces who push this. And your book is just one of 7 books. The others are anthologies or contributed books with many authors. You are the first who wrote a whole book of it. And they have just popped 7 books like this and yours. And yesterday it came another one from Konrad Dott and Reinhard Popp in the Sigmund Freud University in Vienna about the discourse ethics in this. So what stayed in my mind was the title line from, I think it was the British or another international journal of medicine, who characterized the US situation, which they hopefully start to move out of, as dying in the vacuum of leadership. That was with regard to Trump, but this line is really seductive. If we say the Swedish and also others is dying in a vacuum of ethics, that is horrible, right? That is hell, so to say, where no one takes care of no one, where we don't bother any longer each other. So the opposite must be suffering and also dying if necessary, not in a vacuum, but in a somehow filled, loaded space, uploaded with all these values and virtues, which you have presented and which we have discussed today, right? So dying in, what is the opposite of the vacuum? That is the lived space with my
house
theory.
Maybe? Some sort of house.
I would like to share a short text. It's just 2 minutes, 1 page, on a fairy tale. It's the first fairy tale that I wrote in my life, but with related to the discussions we had also about solidarity and discipline and freedom and all that, if you would allow.
Yes.
Because I really thought of how can we deal with this power of this tiny virus. And if you allow, I read it because it's more precise. Fairy tale of the Emperor and the A. An emperor had a dream to rule the whole world. When he woke up, it was a man, not a woman. He looked around his empire, which was already large, but his subjects were mainly animals and his territory the forests. He decided to work hard for his dream, especially to have not only animals, but human beings under his control. The emperor was tiny in size, which was okay compared to tiny creatures like ants and bacteria. But comparison to human beings caused him to suffer, like Napoleon, from inferiority complex due to his small nature or stature. Thus, he decided to conquer the whole world with a threefold strategy: invisibility, speed, and fast adaptation or innovation. He made himself invisible to human eyes. And for speed, he did not use a fast-riding car or a rocket, but implemented the idea of transporting his huge armies of tiny soldiers by wind and then by piggyback on human beings, using their skin, lungs, and the blood highway of their bodies in order to conquer them. When he experienced danger or resistance, he and his soldiers could change their color and behavior like some animals in order to remain undetected until the humans had been conquered. This was his war strategy. He had fast and fabulous success, conquering all continents in less than 1 year. He planned to declare himself the greatest global emperor ever seen in world history and ordered an impressive crown, in Latin corona, for the day of his entronization as global emperor. During this battle, within few months, over 1 million humans had been killed by the soldiers of the emperor. The humans became so afraid and alert that they organized themselves in counter-armies to defeat the emperor's soldiers. Walls and clothes were constructed, discipline in behavior increased, as armies around the globe were trained to defend the families of killed humans. Top-trained soldiers built special forces with the human armies. They launched a VV campaign, Vaccine Against Virus campaign, to defeat the soldiers of the emperor. Thanks to this decisive response of humans, the emperor suffered from losses on the battlefield. He was forced to rethink his strategy. To the initial 3 tactics, he added a 4th one: divide et impera, divide and rule, which is the rule of all global emperors. He learned from history that this strategy was the most successful for emperors throughout history. In order to implement it, he spread rumors of disinformation about the danger of a global VV strategy, vaccine against virus strategy, and advised that each country should first look after its own interest and population. This would allow the emperor to continue the battle with the soldiers among those without the V arms, the vaccine arms. The propaganda department of the emperor also spread disinformation, which divided the human armies by nation, language, and religion. As humans fought each other instead of fighting the emperor's troops, the latter regained ground and increased their territory, still with a goal to conquer the whole globe. But some troops of humans discovered this 4th strategy of divide and rule. They called other troops not to be divided, but to concentrate on unity to defeat the emperor and his troops. The humans started a global A campaign with posters, emails, publications, calls, social media. On the question of what A stands for, the A character stands for, the campaigners answered, A stands for agape. Agape means universal love. They also declared, we refuse to be divided by the emperor. We support each other in order to defeat him. We are all children of the absolute who is above the emperor. A stands for agape love, as we belong to the absolute, not to the emperor with his corona crown. This campaign was so powerful that all human troops stood together and after many battles and some years finally conquered the emperor and his troops. They ended this long war with the A celebration day. Since then, they celebrate it annually as the Day of the Victory of Love. Just a small fairy tale.
Thank you.
Beautiful. But I really like this story, and yeah, it reminds me also. Yeah, I am a medical doctor and trained as a medical doctor. I don't work as one, but then for me, it seems to be that, the only thing that I wanted was from the beginning was, I wanted to protect people. I didn't want to get people to become sick and suffer. And that's for me, my goal of why I spoke up. I don't want the world to suffer. And that's a bit one of the morals of your story, that we should all,
Yes,
do this together. I like the story. It's a nice way to end this session, I think.
Thank you.
Humans are a herd, to say. We are a community. We don't like to be on our own. I really would regard hell as a place where I'm suffering and no one is there holding my hands or infusing me with hope, even if it's only one day, 1 week, or whatever. As Günther Altner, one of my main mentors, has said, you know, Christoph, he is dead by now. He wrote a book where it says every life is worth to live. There shouldn't be made any differentiation between young and old, and between 1 or 2 days, or between having disabilities or whatever. Every life is worth to live. It is a gift, so to say. So I'm really happy that we could have this talk, and it feels right also to have it on the 1st of Advent, because we almost try to turn time around in Advent before Christmas, where we stop a little bit, rushing forward. And Sweden is a very progressive country where modernity pushes up our speed and acceleration. But Advent is directly the opposite. Calm down, speed down, slow down, and open your eyes and senses and minds.
Time for hope.
To open up what do we await of the future? And if you just do it, things start to happen. And I'm happy that we almost try to figure out what words, concepts, and graphics and whatever could help us. So I really would say thank you to you, Christoph, to have inspired us. And I would like to end with reading your wonderful page in the book, and then all listeners and viewers could imagine what this means for our future of reconciliation, resilience in Sweden, in Nordic, in Europe, but all over the planet. So I think you could grasp the words.
Before we you show that, just a word of thanks to you for organizing and being in this very constructive dialogue. And I think, as you said, each book is not the end of the story. It's a contribution for further development. And I think if we can contribute together from these different angles that we represent, and also your remark on Advent, I think is important. It's a kind of threatening situation, but also a period where we wait for the new normal. I would not call it normal, but maybe a vision that comes partially true. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and my personal hope is that we can really transform this. It was Ernst Ulrich Weizsäcker who wrote the preface to your book, and his follower I met in Munich a couple of years ago, Uwe Schneiderwind, who has done a marvelous book called The Great Transformation, and we still wait for the English version. So the great transformation is necessary for all of us in small local sizes, and you have made contributions to this before and now on, but I really have hope that the pandemic's lessons can help us with this great transformation, also with regard to climate change and social justice, right? So
let's hope 2021 is a better year than 2020.
Right. So let's take a look at this. Can you see this?
Yes.
This, what will you call it? A pear, a birne, or
an egg. I call it the egg. It's a symbol of life, you know. That's why I put it in the form of an egg.
It's okay. I have a dream. Superpowers cooperate. Suspicion is converted to trust. Escalation is turned to de-escalation, and domination is replaced by participation. Innovation is balanced with the conservation. Competition is combined with cooperation. Extremism is defeated by respect for opposites. And power and leadership are executed with integrity. The golden rule of reciprocity becomes true. Self-confidence is balanced with modesty. Soft water is stronger and heartstones, and freedom and justice will kiss each other. Hate is transformed into love, and death is integrated into life. Love never ends. We have a dream. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
And,
thank you so much.
We'll meet again.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Touch with our forum also on the English webpage. We need all cooperations we can.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your great work and your parts. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.